This book was written for ordinary people. It is the scholars and professors who've messed it up. Quite simply, intellectuals mess things up. In fact, I've discovered, I've lived and been teaching long enough and spoken in universities long enough to know that you can fool intellectuals much more quickly than ordinary people. By dressing it up in the right philosophical language, you can convince intellectuals almost of anything. One of the verses I love in Scripture, in the Gospels, is, "And the common people heard Jesus gladly." And that is not only a tribute to Jesus, though it is a tribute to him, because they said he speaks as someone who knows what he's talking about. He speaks with authority, not like our preachers who get it all out of books. But it's a tribute to common people. You can't fool common people. Perhaps that's why we don't see too many of them in church. You can't fool them. They'll vote with their feet. They will say the emperor has no clothes. To back this up, I quote two Bible scholars. Here's one. "It is one of the misfortunes of our expertise-oriented culture that when anything seems difficult, it is sent off to the university to be figured out." I like that comment. That's Eugene Patterson in his book on Revelation. And here's another written in 1884. "We boldly affirm that the study of this book of Revelation would present absolutely no possibility of error if the inconceivable, often ridiculous, prejudice of theologians in all ages had not so trammeled it and made it bristle with difficulties that most readers shrink from it in alarm. Apart from these preconceptions, the Revelation would be the most simple, most transparent book that prophet ever penned." That was a great saint in 1884. Did you get the message? Don't read too many books about Revelation. You'll finish up in confusion. The scholars have got so many different schools of interpretation that you'll wonder if anybody could ever understand it. This book was written for 7 little churches in which many of the members were slaves, and yet Jesus expected them to understand it. Let me tell you a story. I can't guarantee that it's true. It may be a preacher's story. Do you know what I mean by that? There was a preacher's little boy said to his daddy once, "Daddy, was that story true or was you just preaching?" And we know the feeling, don't we? There are apocryphal stories that are so useful to preachers that they get handed on and handed round and used in the pulpit. But this is the story I heard, and it took place in America in a theological seminary. Seminary. Freudian slip. And there were students there who were having lectures on the apocalyptic literature in the Bible. And a professor was giving apocalyptic lectures. And he took them through a bit of Daniel, a bit of Ezekiel, and of course the book of Revelation. And the students finished up in despair. So as soon as the lecture was over, they ran for the sports hall and had a game of basketball to get it all out of their system. And while they played, they noticed that the janitor, a black man, was sitting at the side of the court waiting to lock up when they'd finished. And they noticed that he was reading the Bible. And so they went over to him after they'd finished the game and said, "Good to see you reading the Bible. Sure love it. What part are you reading?" "The book of Revelation." "You don't understand that, do you?" "Of course I do." "Well, tell us, what's the message?" He said, "Simple. Jesus wins." Now, There is a bit more to the book of Revelation than that, but that simple man had got the message. This was written for ordinary people, not for scholars, not for professors. It was written for people who were about to suffer big trouble. And it was to help them. I have smuggled Bibles into China, and it's so exciting to find the believers in China, though they suffer, coming out victorious. And the book of Revelation is their favorite book. And maybe that's why we in the West make such a meal of it, because we're not suffering. It was written as a manual for martyrdom. It was written to prepare people to be willing to die for Jesus. And since that is a situation we don't even contemplate in the comfort of our Western world, the book of Revelation becomes simply a kind of intellectual puzzle. We love making schedules about the future so we can work out what time it is on God's clock. That's not why it was written. It was written for ordinary people. There is, however, one qualification we must add. It was written for ordinary people in Asia in the 1st century. And so somehow we must get back into their mind, back into their thinking, and then come back into our century and apply it.